August 19, 1944. The air in the Wehrmacht headquarters in East Prussia was thick with a mixture of stale cigar smoke and a palpable sense of unease, though General Oberst Alfred Jodl did his best to project an aura of detached analytical calm. He leaned over the massive situation maps, his gaze fixed on the rapidly collapsing Western Front. Intelligence reports, meticulously compiled and cross-referenced, spoke of an American advance of unprecedented speed. His staff, a collection of some of Europe's finest military minds, had pored over the numbers, calculating the inexorable mathematics of Allied supply lines. 400 miles. That was the staggering distance now separating Patton's spearheading Third Army from the relative safety of the Normandy beaches, their primary logistical umbilical cord. 400 miles of war-torn, cratered, and deliberately destroyed French countryside. The conclusion, shared by every officer in the room, was simple, elegant, and, they believed, utterly irrefutable. The Americans have outrun their logistics. A wry smile touched Jodl's lips, a flicker of satisfaction in the grim theater of war. Patton will halt within days, he predicted, his voice low but firm, cutting through the tension. Perhaps hours. The sentiment was echoed in the murmurs of his subordinates. No army, he continued, emphasizing each word with the weight of decades of military experience, can sustain such advanced speeds without fuel. Not for long. From his vantage point, within the heavily fortified concrete labyrinth of Hitler's Wolfschanze headquarters, Jodl articulated what every German general, from the grizzled veterans of the Eastern Front to the younger, theoretically astute strategists, understood implicitly from bitter experience. An armored division, a monstrous beast of steel and fire, consumed an astronomical 150,000 gallons of fuel daily when truly advancing, when its engines were roaring, its tracks churning through mud and shattered earth, its guns spitting destruction. This wasn't merely a theoretical number. It was a hard, unforgiving reality, etched into the German military psyche by the frozen plains of Russia. The Americans, he mused, were now 400 miles from their primary supply depots, an almost unimaginable chasm. The calculation, to Jodl and his staff, was not just inescapable but almost insulting in its simplicity. Patton's Third Army, for all its audacious speed and tactical brilliance, would inevitably grind to a halt. It was a physical law, as fundamental as gravity. This inevitable paralysis would grant the Wehrmacht precisely what it desperately needed. Time. Time to regroup along the formidable natural barrier of the Seine River. Time to reorganize their shattered divisions, perhaps even time to solidify a defensive line that could hold until the brutal European winter set in, turning the muddy fields into frozen fortresses and stifling the Allied advance. It was a reprieve, a strategic breathing room that seemed almost too good to be true. What Jodl, in his fortified bunker far from the smoke and chaos of the Western Front, didn't know, couldn't possibly conceive, was that at that very moment, a mere 125 miles away, a spectacle of logistical defiance was already unfolding. A seemingly endless procession of 5,958 trucks was rolling eastward, a relentless, roaring river of steel and cargo. Their headlights, blazing defiantly into the August night, shattered every ingrained military doctrine of blackout discipline, turning the dark countryside into a luminous, moving ribbon of light. These trucks, the unsung heroes of a nascent legend, were carrying a staggering 12,500 tons of vital supplies every 24 hours. A constant, pulsating artery of war material, pushing against the very limits of what was thought possible. The Red Ball Express. The name itself, a fleeting nod to railway terminology, held no immediate terror for German generals. But the operation it described was a logistical endeavor so audacious, so utterly unprecedented, that German military science, rooted in careful planning, conservation, and methodical execution, had never even bothered to conceive of its possibility. It was, in their meticulously crafted worldview, an impossible undertaking, and yet it was already in motion, a force that was about to shatter every single assumption they held about mechanized warfare, about the very nature of conflict in the modern age. Within 72 hours, Patton's supposedly immobilized tanks, the metal behemoths expected to be rusting silently for lack of fuel, would crash through German positions at the Seine, unleashing a torrent of firepower and mobility that would leave the Wehrmacht reeling. Within a week, the iconic bells of Notre Dame would ring out in liberation as Allied forces entered Paris. Within a month, those same triumphant armies would stand not at the Seine, but at the very German border itself, a border once thought inviolable, now threatened by an unstoppable, relentless tide. The Wehrmacht's finest military minds, the architects of blitzkrieg, the masters of tactical maneuver, were about to receive a lesson delivered not by cunning battlefield stratagems or superior firepower, but by the relentless, grinding efficiency of American logistics. A lesson that would fundamentally redefine their understanding of what modern warfare truly entailed. This monumental undertaking was orchestrated and executed by 23,000 truck drivers, a staggering 75% of whom were African American soldiers. These men, often overlooked, frequently discriminated against, and serving in a still segregated army, transformed a hastily designated one-way highway system into what would become arguably the most efficient and impactful military supply line in history. Their sweat, their exhaustion, and their unwavering determination were the true fuel for Patton's Blitz, a silent, unseen force that irrevocably tipped the scales of World War II. The German General Staff's unshakable confidence in the inevitable failure of American logistics wasn't born of arrogance alone, though that certainly played its part. It was, rather, a deeply ingrained conviction forged over decades of intense military experience and reinforced by recent painful observations. They, after all, had been the undisputed pioneers of blitzkrieg, the lightning war that had revolutionized combined arms warfare, stunning the world with its speed and ferocity. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, the brutal, unyielding tyranny of supply lines. Their own dazzling campaigns, particularly the initial thrusts into the Soviet Union, had repeatedly stalled not primarily from fierce Soviet resistance, at least not initially, but from the simple, crushing inability to supply forces across the vast, inhospitable distances of the Eastern Front. It was a ghost that haunted their strategic planning, a fundamental weakness they believed to be inherent in any rapidly advancing mechanized army. In Russia, the sheer scale of the operation had exposed every logistical vulnerability. German trucks, though robust, broke down on the abysmal Russian roads, their finely tuned engineering struggling against the mud and permafrost. And even worse, the German military, despite its reputation for modern warfare, still relied on horse-drawn wagons for a staggering 80% of its military transport. These anachronistic units, however resilient, simply couldn't match the blistering speed of the Panzer spearheads, leaving crucial supplies miles behind. Furthermore, the fundamental difference in railway gauge between Western Europe and the Soviet Union meant that supplies, painstakingly delivered by rail, would pile up, immobile and unusable, hundreds of miles from the front lines, creating bottlenecks that strangled their advances. General der Panzertruppe Heinrich von Lüttwitz, a seasoned commander who would lead the 47th Panzer Corps from September 1944, had penned a stark memo in July, a prescient observation from the German perspective. "The Americans," he wrote with a certain grim satisfaction, "face the same logistical impossibility we faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage, which they so trumpet, becomes a disadvantage. Machines require fuel, ammunition, parts, ceaseless maintenance. They have advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what comes next. Paralysis. Inevitable paralysis." German intelligence, true to its meticulous nature, had tracked American consumption rates with an almost obsessive fervor. They knew, down to the last gallon, the voracious appetite of modern warfare. A single Sherman tank, the American workhorse, guzzled fuel at a rate of 0.5 miles per gallon on roads, a figure that plummeted even further, becoming far worse when traversing cross-country terrain. An infantry division, ostensibly less mechanized, still required a substantial 700 tons of supplies daily, and an armored division, the spearhead of any advance, demanded a colossal 1,000 tons every single day. Patton, with his characteristic audacity and aggressive tactics, commanded a force of 12 divisions stretching across a 60-mile front. The mathematics, to the German strategists, appeared not just irrefutable but devastatingly conclusive. 12,000 tons daily. 12,000 tons that needed to be transported 400 miles from the distant beaches, over roads that had been systematically damaged, cratered, or outright destroyed by the retreating Germans, through a transportation network deliberately rendered useless by demolition charges and scorched earth policies. It was, they believed, an impossible equation. General Major Siegfried Westphal, who would soon rise to become Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt in September, meticulously calculated on August 20th. His pen scratching furiously over ledger paper, charting the logistics of doom for the Americans. Even if the Americans possessed unlimited trucks, he wrote, underscoring the absurdity of the premise, which they don't, and perfect roads, which they don't, and no mechanical failures, which is impossible, they still couldn't sustain Patton's advance more than another 48 hours. His conclusion was delivered with the cold, hard logic of a physicist describing immutable laws. "Physical laws cannot be violated," he declared, summing up the German conviction. Not even by American industry. This was their central strategic bet, their last desperate hope on the Western Front, that the sheer physics of logistics would bring the American juggernaut to a grinding halt. They believed they had seen this play out before, and they were confident in its rerun. The air in the requisitioned French chateau near Le Mans on August 25, 1944, was thick with tension, not from enemy proximity, but from the grim reality of a crisis within. Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayres of the Motor Transport Service faced a room full of skeptical officers. Their faces, etched with exhaustion and worry, reflected the stark, unsettling truth presented by the maps and figures laid out before them. The mathematical reality was undeniable, brutal, and utterly unprecedented. Patton's Third Army, a force now operating on the very edge of logistical collapse, was consuming supplies at a rate faster than any army in the history of warfare. Its speed of advance, a marvel of tactical execution, had simultaneously become its greatest vulnerability, defying all conventional logistical planning and pushing the existing infrastructure to its breaking point. Traditional supply methods, the very bedrock of military logistics, had simply disintegrated under the strain. The damaged and sparse railway network, the scheduled convoys that were too slow or too small, the depot-to-depot distribution model, all had utterly collapsed. The arteries of supply were clotting, threatening to starve the beast of its lifeblood. It was a moment of profound crisis, where conventional wisdom offered no answers. Then, Ayres, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a revolutionary vision, addressed the room. His words cut through the gloom, audacious in their simplicity and breathtaking in their scope. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice steady, radiating an understated confidence, "we're going to create a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front lines, a continuous, relentless flow." He paused, letting the radical implications sink in. Every single vehicle will run 20 hours out of 24. No stopping except for gas and emergencies. We'll move 12,500 tons daily minimum. It was a plan that tossed out every sacred cow of military logistical doctrine. The name, Red Ball Express, itself carried a lineage of urgency. It was borrowed from railway terminology, where a red ball freight designated an express shipment, one that took absolute priority over everything else on the tracks, demanding immediate passage and no delays. The Red Ball Express, Ayres declared, would operate on precisely the same principle. Absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions. The urgency of war, the demands of a rapidly advancing army, would be met with an equally relentless, unyielding supply system. The technical specifications of this impromptu logistical marvel defied every single tenet of German military doctrine. Principles that had been honed over decades of meticulous planning and battlefield experience. Instead of one highway, there would be two parallel one-way highways, one for the loaded trucks thundering forward towards the front, and another running alongside for the empty vehicles making their swift return. This eliminated the chaos and delays of two-way traffic on narrow, damaged roads. Operations would be 24 hours a day, a relentless, unbroken flow. Headlights, a forbidden luxury in war zones for fear of enemy air attack, would blaze defiantly in the night, abandoning every blackout discipline in favor of speed and visibility. The no-stop policy was draconian, permitting halts only for essential fuel or critical mechanical failure. Convoys would maintain razor-thin 5-minute intervals, a continuous chain of roaring engines, averaging a blistering 35 miles per hour, a speed considered reckless and unsustainable by many. Mobile maintenance units, highly trained and equipped, would be strategically positioned every 50 miles, ready to pounce on breakdowns, and crucially, MP checkpoints strategically placed along the route were given strict orders. Any vehicle struggling below 25 miles per hour, deemed a bottleneck, was to be removed immediately, pushed off the road if necessary, to maintain the relentless flow. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commanding the advanced section of the Communication Zone, ADCS, reviewed the projected numbers, his brow furrowed with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "We need 140 truck companies," he stated, his voice betraying the sheer impossibility of the ask. 5,958 vehicles minimum, operating at 90% availability. That's impossible by any logistics textbook ever written. Every single one. Yet, with a combination of sheer will, American industrial might, and an almost reckless improvisation within 36 hours of its conception, the impossible was not only operational, but roaring to life. The first trucks, laden with the instruments of victory, were already rolling, a testament to a logistical revolution born of desperation and audacious vision. On August 26, 1944, a new chapter in military history began, quietly with the roar of engines. Drivers from the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company, their faces a mixture of apprehension and grim determination, climbed into the cabs of their GMC SIG-2 2-ton trucks. These robust, ubiquitous vehicles, affectionately nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, were not glamorous. They were workhorses, designed for grit and reliability, and on this day they were loaded to capacity with 105mm artillery shells, a vital cargo destined for Patton's guns at Mellon, some 300 miles to the east. The journey ahead was long, dangerous, and uncertain, but the mission was clear. Keep Patton moving. The demographic composition of the Red Ball Express, had German racial theorists bothered to investigate beyond their preconceived notions, would have utterly stunned them. Of the 23,000 drivers who would eventually operate this relentless route, approximately 75% were African American soldiers. These men, serving in an army that was still profoundly segregated, an army where they couldn't eat in the same restaurants as white soldiers or use the same facilities in much of America, were now entrusted with the monumental task of keeping the most celebrated white general's army in motion. It was a profound, biting irony, a testament to both the enduring hypocrisy of their nation and their own unyielding commitment to the cause of freedom, even if that freedom was denied to them at home. Within hours of the Red Ball Express rolling, the drivers, a diverse band united by shared purpose and peril, began to forge their own distinct culture. They personalized their anonymous steel charges, painting audacious slogans on their trucks. Patton's Blood Bank, a grim but accurate descriptor. Hitler, Here We Come, a declaration of intent. Detroit to Berlin Express, a testament to the industrial might backing their efforts. They didn't just drive. They infused their mission with defiant spirit. They also, out of necessity and a shared understanding of the road, created their own unwritten traffic rules. Slower vehicles, regardless of rank or load, were expected to pull off immediately, yielding to the relentless flow. Mechanical failures, a constant threat, were dealt with brutally. A quick assessment, and if not immediately fixable, the truck was unceremoniously pushed into a ditch, its cargo transferred, its obstruction removed. Any truck that dipped below 20 miles per hour was considered not just slow, but a roadblock, a menace to the entire operation's tempo. The mantra was speed, volume, and relentless forward momentum. By August 28th, German reconnaissance units, initially baffled by fragmented reports, began to piece together something unprecedented. Units from Aufklärung, Reconnaissance 116, radioed in from positions overlooking what was clearly becoming the main Red Ball route. Their reports spoke of a continuous vehicle column, a seemingly endless river of transport. Crucially, they noted, headlights visible for 20 kilometers. No spacing, no blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. Americans have abandoned all military precaution. This violated absolutely everything German military doctrine taught. Headlights at night were an open invitation for air attack, a beacon for enemy bombers. Continuous columns without dispersion presented perfect lucrative targets for artillery and airstrikes. No spacing between vehicles meant that a single disabled truck could halt an entire convoy, creating a bottleneck that could be easily exploited. Yet, the Americans seemed utterly unconcerned, driving with a brazen confidence that defied all established rules of warfare. General Lieutenant Edgar Feuchtinger, commanding the 21st Panzer Division, a man intimately familiar with the demands of mechanized warfare, personally observed the Red Ball Express from concealed positions on August 30th. His report to Army Group B headquarters reflected a growing sense of alarm, verging on disbelief. "The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension," he wrote, struggling to put into words the scale of what he witnessed. "Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without pause. They don't hide, don't disperse, don't follow any rules we understand. It's not military science. It's mass production applied to warfare." Feuchtinger's assessment was chillingly accurate. The Germans, accustomed to warfare as a precise, calculated art, were facing an enemy who treated it as an industrial process, a relentless outpouring of men and material. Their methodical, resource-conscious approach was utterly overwhelmed by a system built on volume, speed, and a seemingly infinite reservoir of industrial might. What the Germans, steeped in their traditional military doctrine, fundamentally failed to grasp was that American logistics operated on entirely different principles. Where German doctrine emphasized meticulous concealment, the Americans relied on sheer, overwhelming volume. Where German commanders conserved every vehicle, painstakingly maintaining their limited fleet, the Americans simply assumed a 20% mechanical failure rate daily and planned accordingly, factoring in redundancy and rapid replacement. Where Germans followed strict, almost ritualistic military procedures, the Americans improvised continuously, adapting on the fly, solving problems with a pragmatic ingenuity that often bordered on chaos in the eyes of their more rigid adversaries. This wasn't just a difference in methods. It was a clash of philosophies, of entire worldviews applied to the brutal crucible of war. The numbers achieved by the Red Ball Express, when finally compiled, were so staggering that they defied German calculations of what was even logistically possible. In its very first week, from August 25th to August 31st, 1944, the Red Ball delivered a colossal 89,939 tons of supplies. This translated to a daily average of 12,148 tons, far exceeding the initial ambitious target. The round-trip distance for many of these trucks was a grueling 686 miles. The operation involved 5,158 trucks, making an average of 1.5 trips daily, a testament to the relentless 20-hour operating schedule. And the fuel consumed by the operation itself, just to keep its own internal combustion engines roaring, was a staggering 300,000 gallons every single day. German logistics specialists, upon capturing these figures from American documents, simply dismissed them as wildly exaggerated propaganda. They couldn't, or wouldn't, believe such numbers were real. But the numbers were real, and even more alarmingly for the Germans, they were accelerating. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established a rhythm that seemed not just impossible, but almost magical, to German logistics officers who still relied on horse-drawn wagons for 80% of their military transport. It was a stark, visual representation of two distinct eras of warfare colliding. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminus, a continuous, pulsating flow. The average convoy consisted of 67 vehicles, each loaded with 5 tons of standard cargo, often overloaded to 7 tons, pushing the vehicles to their absolute limits. The time to cover the 350-mile one-way journey averaged a blistering 14 hours. Turnaround time at each end, the crucial window for refueling, unloading, and reloading, was a mere 2 hours, a logistical marvel in itself. At any given moment, an astonishing 5,000 vehicles were in constant motion, a ceaseless river of supplies flowing towards the front. The Red Ball Express wasn't just a system. It was a living, breathing entity that generated innovations hourly. Drivers and mechanics, often operating on the edge of exhaustion, continuously solved problems that German military science considered insurmountable, often simply because they refused to believe in insurmountable. When trucks broke down, and approximately 1/800 did daily, mobile maintenance units, equipped with tools and spare parts, performed repairs directly on the roadside. Mechanics developed a brutal but effective triage system. 15 minutes to fix a truck, or it was unceremoniously pushed off the road. Parts were scavenged, cannibalized from vehicles deemed irreparable, turning wrecks into resources. Engines, the very heart of the operation, were swapped out in a mind-boggling 45 minutes using mobile cranes, minimizing downtime. When the designated Red Ball route became congested, drivers, with typical American ingenuity, simply created alternate paths, forging new roads out of necessity. They even commandeered French buses to move personnel, freeing up precious cargo trucks. They borrowed abandoned German vehicles, hastily painting them olive drab and pressing them into service. They built bypasses around destroyed bridges, often using rubble from bombed buildings as a makeshift roadbed, demonstrating a pragmatism and resourcefulness that defied conventional engineering. The Germans, observing this seeming chaos that somehow produced unimpeded order, simply couldn't comprehend it. German logistics doctrine emphasized careful planning, rigid maintenance schedules, and strict adherence to proper procedures. The Americans violated every single one of these principles, yet their system, instead of collapsing, seemed to accelerate, growing stronger with every challenge. It was a bewildering spectacle, a force of nature that defied all their attempts at categorization and prediction. Perhaps the most stunning revelation for German observers, one that truly shattered their carefully constructed worldview of warfare, was the audacious scale of American fuel management. The Red Ball Express, a beast of an operation, consumed a staggering 300,000 gallons of gasoline daily just for its own operations. This was more fuel than many entire German armies received for all purposes, a fact that was both bewildering and deeply demoralizing. Yet, despite this astronomical consumption, fuel never ran short. The Americans had created a parallel marvel, an unseen force multiplier. Operation Pluto, pipelines under the ocean, an engineering feat of astonishing ambition, laying flexible fuel pipelines across the English Channel. By September 1944, fuel was flowing directly through these underwater pipes, an invisible, relentless river of high-octane energy that German intelligence had not even detected, let alone could interdict. This was the ultimate logistical bypass. rendering traditional tanker convoys across the channel partially obsolete and securing an uninterrupted supply. Forward fuel dumps, massive reservoirs of gasoline, were established every 25 miles along the Red Ball route, ensuring that no vehicle waited more than 10 minutes for refueling. Tanker trucks, operating their own parallel convoy system, ensured these dumps were constantly replenished, a seamless, unbreakable chain of supply. General Major Walter Warlimont, observing from aerial reconnaissance photographs, could only stare in bewildered dismay. "The Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire strategic reserves," he reported, a note of profound defeat in his voice. "They burn more gasoline moving gasoline than we allocate to entire panzer divisions. This isn't war as we understand it. It's industrial overflow." His words encapsulated the dawning, terrifying realization for the German High Command. They weren't just fighting an army. They were fighting an entire industrial civilization, one that treated resources not as precious commodities to be hoarded, but as tools to be expended in overwhelming quantities. The Red Ball Express didn't just supply Patton's advance, it multiplied its speed exponentially. German military doctrine calculated that an armored division could sustain a 20 to 30-mile advance daily under optimal conditions, a benchmark of rapid maneuver. Patton's divisions, however, supplied by the Red Ball Express, averaged an astonishing 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks on end, shattering all previous tactical assumptions. On September 1, 1944, the 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles in morning operations, a remarkable achievement in itself. But instead of halting for a day or even several hours for resupply, Red Ball trucks were waiting, precisely on schedule, with fuel and ammunition. Refueled and rearmed, the division advanced another 32 miles in the afternoon. This 67-mile single-day advance utterly shattered German defensive planning, which simply assumed a maximum 30-mile daily advance. It wasn't just faster, it was a different dimension of speed. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, the revered father of German armored warfare, reviewing the reports in East Prussia, initially refused to believe them. "No armored force can advance 60 miles daily for a week," he declared, slamming his fist on the table. "Mechanical failures alone prevent it. This is propaganda or misidentification. It must be." But intercepted American radio traffic, often broadcast openly and without code, confirmed the unbelievable. More disturbing for German commanders, the Americans were broadcasting their positions with a supreme confidence in their ability to move faster than the Germans could possibly react, turning tactical transparency into a weapon. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had compiled comprehensive reports on the Red Ball Express. The implications were catastrophic for Wehrmacht planning. Every single assumption about American military capability, every carefully constructed strategic premise required immediate, painful revision. The very foundations of their war effort were being undermined, not by tanks or planes, but by trucks. The intelligence reports flooding into German headquarters detailed observations that not only defied military science, but seemed to mock the very ethos of the Wehrmacht. "Americans wasted vehicles prodigiously," one report noted, a statement so contrary to German resource management it must have caused actual physical pain to the officers reading it. They spoke of abandoning damaged trucks rather than painstakingly repairing them, a sacrilege to the German philosophy of conservation. Drivers, the reports continued, operated on stimulants for days, often 72 hours straight, hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine, violating every principle of personnel management and sustainable operation. There was no camouflage discipline, the entire system vulnerable to an air attack that, miraculously, never came in force. Mechanical failure rates of 30% daily were simply overwhelmed by redundancy, by the sheer volume of replacements, and fuel consumption. An amount that would bankrupt any European military flowed endlessly. Field Marshal Walter Model, a master of defensive warfare, received these reports with growing desperation. His response, grim and laced with a terrifying new understanding, revealed the true extent of the existential threat. "If these reports are accurate," Model wrote, his words heavy with the weight of impending defeat, "we face not a superior army but a superior civilization. They make no effort to hide because they don't fear us. They waste resources because they have infinite resources. We cannot defeat this with military tactics." This was the core of the Red Ball Express's psychological warfare. Not just military might, but the crushing, demoralizing power of industrial abundance. The Red Ball Express drivers, the human cogs in this industrial machine, paid a physical price that German observers, focused on material losses, couldn't truly see. Operating for 72 straight hours, many hallucinated from exhaustion, their minds playing tricks in the blur of endless roads. Accidents, a grim statistic, killed over 300 drivers during the Red Ball's operational period. Trucks collided in the thick, often blinding fog, overturned on damaged, unfamiliar roads, or burst into flames when overheated engines ignited their volatile cargo. Yet, despite these harrowing conditions and the constant specter of death, morale among these men remained extraordinarily high. These were men, predominantly African American, who were denied equal rights at home, yet they understood with an almost spiritual clarity that they were making history. They were proving Hitler's insidious racial theories wrong with every mile driven, every ton delivered. Their sweat and courage were tangible repudiations of Nazi ideology. Captured German officers, stripped of their illusions, provided eloquent testimony to the Red Ball Express's devastating impact. Oberst Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, recounted to his interrogators a conversation that perfectly summarized the German realization. "We knew we'd lost when we understood your supply system. You violate every rule. Waste fuel, abandon vehicles, exhaust drivers, yet succeed through sheer volume. You've industrialized warfare beyond our comprehension." The psychological impact on German forces was profound and devastating. Wehrmacht soldiers, huddled in foxholes or desperate defensive positions, could hear the ceaseless roar of American trucks all night, every night. Endless motors, endless supplies. While they had perhaps 3 rounds per rifle, the Americans were bringing millions of rounds. The very sound itself, a constant low growl on the horizon, became a potent form of psychological warfare, a constant reminder of their enemy's inexhaustible resources. The vehicles themselves, particularly the GMC CCK-W2 1 2-ton truck, the ubiquitous deuce and a half, amazed German engineers. They represented the pinnacle of American mass production perfection. General Motors had produced over 500,000 of these vehicles by war's end. More trucks than the entire German military possessed of all types combined. These trucks featured innovations Germans hadn't implemented. All-wheel drive as standard, not an exception. Automatic tire inflation systems, waterproofing that allowed 30-inch fording, engines that ran on low-quality fuel without modification, and heaters that actually worked in winter, a stark contrast to the often freezing cabs of German vehicles. More stunning was the American maintenance philosophy. Where Germans rebuilt engines, Americans simply replaced them. Where Germans rationed every single part, Americans discarded entire vehicles for minor problems, knowing a constant stream of new ones was arriving. Where Germans had a handful of master mechanics, Americans had thousands of competent mechanics, capable of performing 80% of all repairs, ensuring rapid turnaround. As the front moved relentlessly east, the Red Ball Express adapted with a speed that further stunned German planning officers, accustomed to weeks, even months, of meticulous preparation for major logistics changes. When the original route to Chartres became insufficient, Americans created Red Ball Express extensions overnight. The White Ball Express from Rouen to Paris, the Green Diamond from Cherbourg to railroad transfer points, the Red Lion from Bayeux to Brussels, the ABC, Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi. Each new route was operational within 48 hours of conception. German staff officers required weeks to plan similar operations. The Americans simply painted new markers, assigned trucks, and started rolling. It was a testament to a flexible, decentralized command structure and an almost limitless capacity for rapid deployment. The predominance of African American drivers in the Red Ball Express created a profound cognitive dissonance for German racial theorists. Nazi ideology had declared blacks to be inherently inferior, incapable of technical tasks, lacking initiative. Yet, these very drivers were performing logistics miracles that German forces, with all their supposed Aryan superiority, couldn't match. The African American soldiers understood the bitter irony. They knew what the Nazis thought of them, and that knowledge often spurred them to drive even harder, to push through exhaustion, to deliver every ton. Every mile they drove, every load they delivered, was a direct, undeniable refutation of Hitler's grotesque theories. They were fighting racism with truck keys, defeating Nazi ideology through superior performance. Some German prisoners, forced to load Red Ball trucks as laborers, found their worldview shattered by working alongside African American sergeants who calculated weight distributions faster than German engineers, who spoke better English than German English instructors, and who treated prisoners fairly despite everything Nazi propaganda had told them about racial behavior. It was a quiet, profound victory over prejudice on the battlefields of France. The Red Ball Express demanded an infrastructure that Germans deemed utterly impossible to create under combat conditions. Yet, American engineers, working with a speed and improvisational genius that defied belief, achieved the impossible. They built or heavily reinforced 40 bridges, some critical, some temporary, but all essential to maintaining the flow. They established 15 major fuel depots, massive reservoirs of gasoline ready to feed the insatiable appetite of the trucks and the front lines. 26 maintenance stations sprang up along the road, staffed by thousands of mechanics, each a hive of activity, constantly repairing and returning vehicles to service. And perhaps, most remarkably, they constructed 8 temporary cities for drivers, makeshift bivouacs providing basic amenities and a brief respite from the relentless road, all while the operation was running at full tilt. The bridge at Mantes, a crucial choke point, had been systematically destroyed by German engineers. a deliberate act calculated to halt American logistics for weeks, if not months. The Wehrmacht, based on their own capabilities, calculated that its replacement would require a minimum of 6 weeks. American engineers, however, operating with a fierce urgency, built a temporary bridge in a staggering 14 hours. During this astonishing feat, Red Ball convoys were detoured a mere 8 miles on hastily bulldozed bypass roads, a testament to coordinated speed and adaptability. German engineers, observing American construction methods, were left aghast. There were no interminable planning meetings, no detailed blueprints meticulously drawn over weeks, just immediate action, pragmatic problem-solving, and a relentless focus on getting the job done. They built faster than the Germans could destroy, creating essential infrastructure that appeared seemingly overnight in the war-ravaged French fields. One Red Ball Express achievement particularly stunned German artillery officers: ammunition supply rates that exceeded their highest theoretical calculations. American artillery units, unlike their German counterparts, fired without restriction, a luxury no German unit had enjoyed since 1942. During the reduction of Metz's formidable fortifications in September 1944, the 19th Corps artillery fired an almost unbelievable 100,000 rounds in just 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every single one of those rounds, plus a 20% surplus, ensuring continuous firepower. In stark contrast, German artillery defending Metz was rationed to a meager 50 rounds per gun per day. The disparity was overwhelming, demoralizing, and utterly decisive. American guns fired continuously for hours, while German artillery officers calculated that such bombardments required 50 truckloads of ammunition per hour. The Red Ball provided it, without pause, a constant deluge of destruction. The Red Ball Express consumed vehicles at rates that would have paralyzed any other military. By late September, mechanical attrition reached staggering proportions. The average vehicle life was a mere 10,000 miles, a fraction of the normal 30,000 miles expected in peacetime. The daily deadline rate, vehicles out of commission, hovered around 30% of all vehicles. Engines were replaced at a rate of 500 weekly. Tires consumed at 10,000 weekly. Total vehicles destroyed or abandoned exceeded $5,000, a number that would cripple most armies. Yet, the operation never slowed. American industrial production had anticipated such losses. Ships arrived weekly at French ports, carrying hundreds of brand-new trucks fresh off the assembly lines. Replacement drivers were trained in a mere 2 days and immediately thrown into the convoys. German calculations showed Americans destroying more trucks weekly than the entire Wehrmacht possessed in France. Yet, their transport capacity increased rather than decreased. They had achieved something Germans thought impossible: logistics faster than consumption, an industrial machine that churned out supplies and replaced losses at a rate that dwarfed the enemy's capacity to inflict damage. French civilians along the Red Ball route, having endured years of German occupation and its inherent scarcity, witnessed an American abundance that defied their every expectation. The psychological impact on occupied populations was immediate and profound. The Red Ball Express drivers, particularly the African Americans, often shared their rations with French civilians, despite strict regulations against it. At every stop, children would gather and drivers would give them chocolate, cigarettes, or soap, small gestures of kindness that spoke volumes. The contrast with German occupation was stark. Americans gave away casually what Germans had rationed strictly. German intelligence, ever vigilant, reported the devastating propaganda impact. French civilians now believe American victory inevitable. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased 400% along red ball routes. The population that accepted our occupation now actively opposes it. The Red Ball Express, beyond its military function, became a powerful symbol of liberation and a stark demonstration of American material superiority. In early September 1944, the Red Ball Express, for all its audacity and incredible momentum, faced its greatest internal challenge. Patton's Third Army, a relentless spearhead, had advanced so far, so fast, that even the Red Ball began to struggle to maintain the blistering supply rates. The round trip now exceeded 700 miles, stretching human and mechanical endurance to its absolute limits. Drivers were collapsing from sheer exhaustion. Vehicles were disintegrating under the strain, their components simply wearing out faster than they could be repaired. German intelligence, ever watchful, detected the strain, interpreting it as a sign of imminent collapse. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel reported on September 8th, his tone cautious but hopeful. American supply lines show signs of collapse. Convoy intervals have increased from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speed has decreased. This is our opportunity. It was the strategic culmination point the Germans had been waiting for, the moment their physics-based predictions would finally come true. But American adaptability, born of improvisation and a refusal to accept defeat, again surprised the Germans. Within a mere 72 hours, the Red Ball Express, a testament to its decentralized and dynamic nature, underwent a radical reorganization. Instead of single, impossibly long runs, they created intermediate transfer points, cutting individual runs to a more manageable 350 miles, giving drivers and vehicles a much-needed break. They implemented sophisticated driver rotation systems, ensuring fresh crews where possible. Forward maintenance bases were established even closer to the front, speeding up repairs. And, in a move that exemplified American industrial might, they simply doubled the number of assigned vehicles, overwhelming the problem with sheer volume. By September 12th, far from collapsing, tonnage delivery had actually increased. The crisis that should have halted Patton's army, the moment the Germans had so desperately awaited, only made the system stronger, more resilient, and more efficient. Supplementing the Red Ball Express, Americans implemented another logistics solution that Germans deemed impossible: large-scale aerial supply. C-47 transport aircraft, the versatile Dakotas, began delivering critical supplies directly to forward units, each aircraft carrying approximately 3 tons. On September 16, 1944, Wehrmacht observers, counting with disbelief, recorded 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering an astonishing 2,700 tons by air. The Luftwaffe, at its absolute peak, had managed a mere 300 tons daily to Stalingrad, and considered that a maximum suicidal effort. The Americans, however, used transport aircraft like trucks, without major concerns for fighter escort or fuel limitations, assuming losses and overwhelming them with sheer numbers. The Wehrmacht simply couldn't compete with this industrial arithmetic, this casual deployment of air power for logistical purposes. The Red Ball Express also operated under command principles that fundamentally violated German military hierarchy. Junior officers, often lieutenants and captains, were making critical decisions usually reserved for generals in the Wehrmacht. Sergeants, in many cases, commanded operations larger and more complex than those managed by German colonels. This radical decentralization baffled German observers. American logistics operated without apparent central control, one report noted, struggling to reconcile the apparent chaos with the resulting efficiency. Every lieutenant acted like a general, every sergeant like a colonel. Chaos should have resulted. Instead, they achieved efficiency. The Wehrmacht, with its rigid hierarchy and strict chain of command, simply couldn't match this speed and flexibility. Their system, designed for control, was too slow to react to the dynamism of American improvisation. By October 1944, as advancing railheads were finally rebuilt and extended closer to the front, the extraordinary requirements on the Red Ball Express began to reduce. The operation that was initially supposed to last a mere 10 days had, in fact, continued for 82 relentless days, delivering a staggering 412,000 tons of supplies over 122 million ton-miles. German commanders, now fighting desperately on their own borders, reflected on the profound lesson they had just witnessed. Field Marshal Model, in his final report, penned a stark and brutally honest assessment. We were not defeated by American tanks or planes primarily. We were defeated by American trucks. The Red Ball Express, through its sheer, undeniable success, had irrevocably proven that, in modern war, logistics is not merely support. Logistics is strategy. The transition back to rail transport was itself a marvel of American engineering and logistical prowess. While the Red Ball was running, American railroad engineers had reconstructed an astonishing 1,000 miles of destroyed French rail lines. They laid new track faster than the Germans had destroyed it, often utilizing captured German rail equipment, turning the enemy's own resources against them. It was a dual logistical offensive, a testament to a nation that could wage war not just with tanks and planes, but with railroads and trucks. The final Red Ball Express statistics defied every German calculation of logistical possibility. 82 days of continuous operation, 412,193 tons of supplies delivered, 222 million ton-miles covered, an average of 5 fit vehicles daily peaking at 7. A total of 23,000 drivers employed. A colossal 700,000 gallons of fuel consumed daily by the entire operation. 40,000 tons of ammunition delivered to Patton's Third Army alone. 15 million rations transported. 135,000 tons of medical supplies. Reviewing these mind-boggling figures in captivity, German officers admitted they had based their calculations of American logistics on European precedent, on their own limitations. They had multiplied their best performance by 3 and assumed that was the American maximum. They were wrong by a factor of 10. The Red Ball Express wasn't just an operation, it was a revelation, a complete paradigm shift in the understanding of warfare. Beyond the staggering tonnage and the immense distances covered, the Red Ball Express achieved something far more profound, something that struck at the very heart of German military pride. It utterly destroyed German faith in their own military superiority. Wehrmacht officers, who had long dismissed Americans as soft and mechanically dependent, watched in stunned disbelief as those same Americans achieved logistical miracles through sheer, tenacious determination and an almost unimaginable industrial abundance. German prisoners of war, confined behind fences, would stand silently, counting the endless stream of passing red ball trucks. Some wept openly, not from physical suffering, but from a dawning, crushing realization of what it meant. Not just that Americans could supply their armies, but that they could waste more than Germans could produce. They were watching their entire worldview collapse, one roaring truck at a time. The psychological blow was irreversible. The Red Ball Express also forced an unexpected racial reckoning within the American military itself, an institution still deeply scarred by segregation. The operation's astonishing success depended overwhelmingly on African American soldiers who, despite their monumental contribution, were still segregated, denied equal treatment, and barred from many combat roles. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, visiting Red Ball operations in September 1944, witnessed this profound contradiction firsthand. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded the moment. The general stood watching colored drivers who'd been at it for 20 hours straight. He said, "These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to reconsider many things." The success of the Red Ball Express, driven by these brave African American soldiers, created immense pressure for integration, directly contributing to the eventual desegregation of the American military just 3 years later. African American soldiers had proved definitively in the muddy, war-torn fields of France what they had always known. Given the tools and the opportunity, they would match and often surpass anyone. The Red Ball was their combat, and they won it decisively. German racial theorists, the architects of Nazi ideology, struggled desperately to explain away this glaring contradiction. Faced with overwhelming, undeniable evidence of African American competence and heroism, SS racial science publications simply stopped mentioning American logistics operations altogether. The evidence was too overwhelming to deny, too damaging to acknowledge, too inconvenient for their warped worldview. After the war, German military engineers, stripped of ideology and focused on pragmatic lessons, studied Red Ball Express operations intensively. The lessons they extracted revolutionized logistics thinking worldwide. Volume overcomes inefficiency. Mechanical redundancy eliminates vulnerability. Decentralized execution enables speed. Standardization multiplies capability. And human endurance, while having limits, is far higher than previously assumed. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, wrote in 1950, with the wisdom of hindsight and defeat. The Red Ball Express proved logistics determines strategy, not vice versa. Americans understood this. We learned it too late. Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, individual stories of heroism emerged, accounts that Germans found incomprehensible within their rigid military framework. These were verified accounts from military records, testaments to the extraordinary spirit of these men. Corporal John L. Houston, for instance, drove continuously for 48 hours, delivering ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division at Cambrai, falling asleep at the wheel 3 times, only to be revived by fellow drivers and push on. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire from overheated brakes while carrying critical medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it, as procedure strictly required, he drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to a field hospital, jumping out just as flames engulfed the cab. The supplies, miraculously saved, went on to save wounded soldiers from both armies. These stories, multiplied thousands of times across the operation, revealed a fundamental aspect of American military culture to observing Germans: individual initiative, a willingness for calculated risk-taking, and, above all, mission accomplishment overriding strict regulatory compliance. In a desperate, ill-fated attempt to counter the Allied advance, German forces attempted to create their own version of the Red Ball Express in late 1944. Operation Greif, during the Battle of the Bulge, included ambitious plans to use captured American trucks to establish German supply lines. The effort failed almost immediately, a stark demonstration of the insurmountable differences. German drivers couldn't maintain American speeds. German mechanics couldn't repair American equipment fast enough, lacking both the parts and the replace don't repair philosophy. Most fundamentally, German fuel supplies simply couldn't sustain the astronomical consumption rates required. Colonel Otto Skorzeny, commanding the operation, reported grimly, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." It was a confession of profound strategic inferiority, a testament to the industrial chasm between the two nations. The winter of 1944-45 provided the Red Ball Express's ultimate, brutal test. Freezing rain, heavy snow, and treacherous ice should have brought wheeled transport to a complete standstill. German doctrine explicitly stated that wheeled logistics became impossible below 10 degrees C. Yet the Red Ball Express, a testament to sheer human and mechanical defiance, continued its relentless flow. Drivers wrapped chains on tires, poured alcohol into radiators to prevent freezing, and kept rolling. Speeds dropped from 35 to a crawling 15 mph, but tonnage delivery continued. A trickle perhaps, but an unbroken one. German observers reported ice-covered convoys moving through blizzards that had utterly stopped their own panzer divisions. The Americans had created a logistics system that, while not elegant or efficient by German standards, was utterly unstoppable, functioning regardless of weather, terrain, or enemy action. In May 1945, with the war in Europe finally concluded, captured German logistics officers were required to study Red Ball Express operations for historical records, a bitter pill to swallow for proud military men. Their conclusions were unanimous, devastating to German military pride, and profoundly insightful. General der Infanterie Friedrich Schulz summarized their collective realization. The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined. Americans created a temporary civilization, thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies that existed only to feed armies, then dissolved when no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They created superior temporary systems in days. This wasn't just about movement. It was about the very philosophy of construction and disposability, a fundamental difference in how resources were perceived and deployed. Perhaps the most insightful analysis came from General Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare, who recognized the core strategic failure. "We invented blitzkrieg," he wrote with a certain poignant regret, but never solved its fundamental limitation, logistics. Americans solved it through industrial excess we deemed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of material that drowned our forces. His words laid bare the German misunderstanding. They had focused on tactical speed, while the Americans had focused on sustainable, overwhelming force. The Red Ball Express cost the United States approximately $100 million in 1944. This figure encompassed vehicles destroyed, fuel consumed, roads damaged, and even French claims for repairs. German staff officers, accustomed to meticulously managing scarcity, found this figure utterly incomprehensible. Yet Americans considered it cheap. The operation, in enabling the rapid advance, facilitated the capture of 400,000 German soldiers, the swift liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and, crucially, shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Each day of war cost America $250 million. The Red Ball Express, by accelerating victory, paid for itself in a single day of shortened conflict. Lieutenant General John C.H. Lee, commanding logistics for the European theater, articulated this American perspective. We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any previous war, that would be catastrophic losses. In American industrial war, it's acceptable overhead. It was the logic of an industrial superpower, valuing rapid victory over material conservation. An unexpected, profoundly impactful consequence of the Red Ball Express was its revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers, mechanics, and logistics planners returned to America with unparalleled experience operating the world's largest, most complex, and most demanding transportation network. These veterans, applying military logistics principles to civilian commerce, founded trucking companies, contributed to the design of the interstate highway system, and effectively created the modern American logistics industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started by Red Ball veterans who had learned, in the crucible of war-torn France, that volume beats efficiency, speed beats perfection, and if you can keep trucks rolling 24 hours a day, you can indeed move the world. Their wartime lessons reshaped the peacetime economy. Military historians universally recognize the Red Ball Express as the decisive logistics operation of the European theater. Without it, Patton's advance would have stalled, Paris would have fallen weeks later, and German forces would have successfully established formidable winter defensive lines, prolonging the war and costing countless more lives. The operation profoundly validated American military doctrine, which emphasized overwhelming logistics and industrial capacity over mere tactical brilliance. While German officers meticulously studied Clausewitz and battlefield maneuver, Americans studied Detroit assembly lines and railroad timetables. The Red Ball Express unequivocally demonstrated that in modern warfare, the ability to supply forces determines victory far more than any individual tactical brilliance. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Supreme German Commander in the West, received comprehensive intelligence on the Red Ball Express. After studying the reports for hours, a grim realization dawning upon him, he summoned his staff. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice devoid of its usual authority, tinged with a deep weariness. "We face something beyond military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed their culminating point, where advancing forces outrun supplies. That point doesn't exist. They have revolutionized warfare, and we are fighting the last war." His operations officer, Oberst Hans Speidel, ever the tactician, suggested interdicting the Red Ball routes with the remaining Luftwaffe assets. Von Rundstedt's response, however, revealed a complete and utter understanding of their impotence. "With what shall we interdict?" they have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000, which we cannot, they'll replace them in a week. We'd need to destroy 200 trucks daily just to match their production. We don't have 200 aircraft total. The cold, hard numbers had defeated them. Behind the relentless statistics were human stories that truly revealed American character to German observers. Stories that defied their understanding of military discipline and morale. Drivers who hadn't slept for 3 days refused relief because their particular truck might not make it through without them. Mechanics worked tirelessly in freezing rain, grease-stained and exhausted, to keep convoys rolling. Teenagers, lying about their age, drove trucks as if possessed, fueled by patriotism and a desperate need to contribute. Such stories, multiplied throughout the operation, created a mythology that deeply demoralized German forces. The Americans, far from being soft, as propaganda claimed, drove themselves harder than Germans drove horses, but they did it voluntarily, not from fear of punishment. This made them far more dangerous than German doctrine had ever understood. The Red Ball Express became unintentional propaganda, more powerful than any planned psychological operation. German soldiers could hear the convoys at night, endless streams of motors that never stopped. The sound itself became psychological warfare. German units reported hearing ghost convoys that demoralized troops as effectively as actual logistics, a testament to the psychological damage inflicted. The knowledge that Americans had unlimited supplies while Germans rationed their last ammunition created a despair that undermined combat effectiveness more profoundly than direct combat. American psychological warfare units, quick to recognize the impact, began broadcasting truck engine sounds toward German lines when actual convoys weren't present. German units reported these phantom convoys as real, demonstrating the deep-seated psychological damage the Red Ball Express had inflicted. In November 1944, with rail lines finally partially restored, the Red Ball Express was officially discontinued. But its methods, its ethos of relentless, high-volume supply, had revolutionized military logistics permanently. The concept of continuous, high-volume, wasteful but effective supply became American military doctrine. The final innovation was the speed of dissolution. This massive operation, 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, hundreds of installations, disappeared in a mere 72 hours. Troops were reassigned, vehicles redistributed, routes returned to civilian use. Germans, in stark contrast, required months to create far smaller operations and years to dissolve them. Americans built what they needed, used it, discarded it, and were ready to build something better. When German generals finally surrendered in May 1945, many explicitly cited the Red Ball Express as demonstrating the hopelessness of continued resistance. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel stated at his interrogation, "When we understood your logistics capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them." The Red Ball Express was a weapon against which we had no defense. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, among Germany's most competent commanders, was asked what most surprised him about American forces. His answer was stark and revealing. Not your tanks, not your planes, but your trucks. The Red Ball Express showed us that you had militarized your entire society's production capacity. We were fighting your factories, not just your soldiers. The final statistics of the Red Ball Express stand as a testament to American industrial warfare, a monument to a unique approach to conflict. Total cargo delivered, 412,193 tons. Total distance covered, 122 million ton-miles. Trucks employed, fine fit daily average, 7,000 knot peak. Drivers involved, 23,000 total. Operating days, 82. Fuel consumed, 57 million gallons. Tires worn out, 180,000. Vehicles destroyed, 5,000 plus. Cost, 100 million German divisions defeated through supply advantage. 47. Estimated war days shortened, 180. These numbers tell a story that transcended mere military operations. They represent the moment when warfare changed forever, when industrial capacity became more important than tactical brilliance, when logistics determined strategy rather than merely serving it. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express at the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. The ceremony recognized the operation that had often been overshadowed by more glamorous combat operations, but proved equally decisive in Allied victory. Veterans who attended spoke of their immense pride in an operation that proved American industrial might and individual determination could overcome any obstacle. They had driven through unimaginable exhaustion, through constant mechanical failure, through weather that stopped even heavy armor. They were black soldiers, mostly, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition during the war, but they had delivered victory at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved that in modern warfare, logistics is not mere support. It is the main effort. The operation demonstrated that an industrial democracy could mobilize resources on a scale that totalitarian efficiency, for all its rigid planning, simply couldn't match. German generals who had laughed at American logistics were ultimately silenced by 6,000 trucks delivering 2,500 tons daily across 700 miles of liberated France. They had assumed Americans would follow European precedent, conserve resources, advance cautiously. Instead, Americans created a logistics tsunami that drowned German forces in an abundance they could neither comprehend nor counter. The operation's success came not from military genius in the traditional sense, but from a unique blend of American characteristics that Germans never truly understood. Industrial excess, a pragmatic mechanical aptitude, an improvisational skill that embraced controlled chaos, and, most importantly, the fierce initiative of individual soldiers who made independent decisions that, in the Wehrmacht, would require field marshal approval. In his memoirs, General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was the primary beneficiary of the Red Ball Express, wrote the ultimate tribute. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserved as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. Without them, the Third Army doesn't move. Without movement, we don't win. They were black soldiers, mostly, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition, but they won the war as surely as any rifleman. History must record this truth. That truth stands as the final testament to the Red Ball Express. 23,000, mostly African-American drivers, operating 6,000 trucks on a one-way highway to victory, achieved what German military science had declared impossible. They supplied advancing armies faster than physics should allow, maintained a tempo beyond human endurance, and proved that in modern warfare, the side with the most trucks beats the side with the best tactics. The German generals had laughed at American logistics, dismissing it as wasteful, undisciplined, impossible to sustain. 82 days later, those same generals surrendered to armies supplied by the Red Ball Express, finally understanding that American trucks had defeated German tanks, that industrial abundance had overwhelmed military excellence, that logistics had, indeed, become strategy. The Red Ball Express officially ended on November 16, 1944, but its impact echoed through military history, shaping doctrine and strategy for generations to come. It proved that in the industrial age, victory belongs not solely to the bravest soldiers or the brightest generals, but to the nation that can deliver the most supplies, the fastest, the farthest. The German generals who laughed at American logistics in August 1944 signed surrender documents in May 1945, utterly defeated by 23,000 truck drivers who revolutionized warfare at 35 miles per hour. Their story deserves its rightful place among the great military operations of history, not because it was elegant or efficient. It was neither, but precisely because it worked. The Red Ball Express kept Patton rolling, kept the Germans retreating, and proved that in modern war, the convoy of trucks matters infinitely more than the column of tanks. The highways of France still bear the scars of the Red Ball Express. Ruts worn by overloaded trucks, bridges hastily repaired and then made permanent, roadsides that once briefly served as impromptu junkyards for abandoned vehicles. But the greatest monument to the operation is the breathtaking speed of Allied victory. Every day the war was shortened saved thousands of lives, prevented countless acts of destruction. The Red Ball Express shortened it by months. In the end, the German generals who had initially laughed at American logistics learned the hardest lesson of modern warfare. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, and Americans, when truly provoked, talk trucks. The Red Ball Express was America talking very loudly indeed, in the thunderous roar of 6,000 engines that never stopped, carrying democracy and destruction at 35 miles per hour down a one-way road to victory. The final word, perhaps the most poignant, belongs to a German officer whose name is lost to history, but whose words were quoted by a Red Ball driver at the 1994 commemoration. Standing beside a road in Belgium, watching the endless convoy of American trucks roll past, the officer, in accented English, said to his captors, "We prepared for everything. Your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer, relentless and undeniable, rolled past him at 5-minute intervals, driven by exhausted Americans who were, in that very moment, rewriting the rules of warfare, one critical delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express had transformed logistics into strategy, supply into victory, and trucks into the most decisive weapon of the European war. The German generals stopped laughing when they finally understood this profound truth. But by then, Patton was already at their gates, his advance inexorably fueled by the greatest logistics operation in military history.